Hi, you're watching a very, very special recording of Agenda AWANI right here at the World Economic Forum in Davos. This is our 5th year here, and this is the 50th Davos. And the World Economic Forum started out looking at just mainly economic issues, but it's grown way beyond that. And the theme for this year is Stakeholder Capitalism. Before you jump out of your skin on that, don't worry about the terms. But what that means is, for a cohesive and sustainable world, we need not only look at profit, but profit must be looked upon in the context of everything else. Industries use natural resources. They don't pay much for it. Back to nature. But now, with all the greenhouse gases and everything else, the world is burning, Brazil, Australia. So what do? Many people in Malaysia might not think that's related to subject matters like being in the union. So I want to make that trajectory from workers' rights, having the power back to the grassroots workers, and sustainability, and stakeholder capitalism. I am naive on this issue, but the man that could probably do that in less than 20 minutes is seated right beside me, all the way from London. I'm going to say it like that. And Stephen Cotton, thank you so much for making time. You're in charge of a union group that is international, that looks at transport workers, and there's millions of them that you are responsible for. And I've just asked you about Malaysia, but I will keep that to a bit to the center. I'm just going to force you to take that question of linking stakeholder capitalism, which is such a huge term, new to many also, to the fact that this is what the union fight is all about. Workers work for a company, the company makes money, create wealth. But I've just been about 1 hour and a half ago in the discussion room about executive pay. It used to be 1 to 30 from the lowest earning worker in a company to the CEO. But now, after maybe 5 to 10 years ago, it's even touching 200 to 300 times. When the resources of the world are not enough, when we are afraid that there's not enough water for agriculture, hence not enough food, why are we still having this kind of predicaments around the world? If we have millions of people unionized, why can't we get a better deal for people on the ground?
Okay, well, I think first, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. It's a very good question. I think if you look back over history, we've been to a degree indoctrinated by, maybe we could say, North American strategies about management, subcontracting, anti-union, anti-social partnership. So for us, and you very eloquently raised the questions about what is the World Economic Forum. Yeah. For us, we think we have to go a bit back to basics. Yeah. We have to highlight that in order to bring back equality, we need to give more space to women in the workplace. We need to give more opportunities to young people. We need to recognise that traditional world order, perhaps in the geopolitics, is now being weakened by different players. And certainly in Asia Pacific, we see the rise of China challenging some of our traditional markets in the way they work. So for unionists, the fundamental principle remains the same. We have to defend our members. We have to defend it perhaps in a new way. I think for us, of course, the basics of a good employment contract and secure contracts and good benefits and good pay and good social package is still very, very important. Yeah. But the way the world is changing so fast, climate, future of work, technology, all these things become more and more critical for working men and women to have advocates who put forward their points of view to make sure they don't get lost in that 1 to 200 ratio. And if you look at all the studies, the Oxfam study, if you look at the OECD's economic studies, when we had strong labour union numbers, the distribution of wealth was much more balanced. Okay. The opportunities for personal growth were much wider. And economies grow when workers, men and women of Malaysia or wherever, are confident in their employment. So they're prepared to invest in property. They're prepared to invest in personal technology. But it's kind of critical that you build confidence. And we hope that some of the big multinationals are beginning to recognise when they talk about sustainable goals and they talk about their brands.
Yes.
Brands are more expensive. They're not the cheapest denominator. And if you don't have consumers with money in their pocket, they're not in a position to drive the successful ratios. So for us, yes, there needs to be more equity about distribution of wealth, but still we have to work out, I think, the challenge is a little bit on us too.
Yeah.
What's our message? What's our message in 2020 or what's our message in 2030? You know, the massive growth of cities means we need to look at things in different ways.
Correct.
And we need to recognise, you know, the shift in climate. And it's not always easy to convince union bosses to change their perspective on life.
Yeah.
But we have to have science, fact-based policies that we can communicate to women and young people so that we secure their voice in democracy, and we believe unions part of that.
Let's take out just the transportation industries of the world. I mean, if we look at the Asian century, as people like to call it, going towards the third and fourth decade of 21st century, China alone, look at the infrastructure spending, look at the Belt and Road Initiative, and look at the amount of billions, if not trillions of US dollar was only on transportation hubs, transportation linkages. So if we multiply that across a smaller but still sizable country like Indonesia, you know, the last time I interviewed the president of Indonesia, he was looking at the tune of 500 billion US dollar of infrastructure, which a huge part of that is also for transportation because they are island nations, you know. From that sense, that gives you a lot of power because without transportation, there's no way we're talking about shared prosperity. But on the other hand, because it's one of the biggest basket where resources are going into, there's a lot of competition for attention, for resources to grab a bit of that pie. So how do you work in the union movement? Because if you react just to firefighting, then you will always be playing somebody else's war, but your own battles. But if you benchmark it to the whole trend of change like China, what happened when China is the biggest economy of the world, for example, and you've been fighting that since now. So you have a lot more leverage and insight into it. So is that too big of a scenario to paint?
No, I think there's another good and challenging question. So for us, first we need to be clear that the ITF, the International Transport Workers Federation, is the only global union federation outside of the ITUC, which is the national centres, that has a cooperation agreement with the Chinese labour movement. And that conversation is partly captured by your question because China's ability to make economic decisions, bankroll them, and then move initially first within the region and now much wider with the region is a challenge for governments, bankers, those that want to predict markets. Now we would rather share experience with the Chinese labour movement. They have some challenges about multinationals coming in and unionising members or getting them to respect Chinese legislation. So on one level, we're in a conversation. On another level, I think we also are challenging them about the behaviour of Chinese multinationals outside of China.
Okay.
Because we see massive investment. You know, their technology on high-speed rail,
Yes.
which kind of is linked to our climate change conversation, on one level is good, but their technology is also would kind of, between them and Japan, market leaders, and we can see in the future, maybe high-speed rail will be the method of local tourism within regions.
Correct.
So there's a lot of questions about how do we engage with that, and I think for us, we believe communication, conversation, dialogue, building and working on trust, that's not the easiest issue, but recognising that China has a space within the global economy and the global community, and the ITF's political leaders have decided we should be in that conversation, trying, I think, and this is our strategy with everything, to shape some of it for the working people.
How has it been so far?
It can be frustrating sometimes.
Okay, I get that.
It's, when they say China is a very historical country and it learns from its historical lessons, it's difficult sometimes to see them move very quickly on certain elements. But on the other hand, you can also see in their governmental movements that they do understand market forces. They do recognise infrastructure costs. They do recognise distribution of wealth. And they're in all of our sectors, so shipping, ports, aviation. We were talking to them about road transport. They have some serious challenges with their own subcontracted road transport systems.
Yes.
Under a lot of precarious work. You won't be surprised to say that we're advocates against subcontracting and precarious work. We want people to have good, secure, directly employed jobs wherever you fit in the global economy. And so we can share experience. We also work together with them at the International Labour Organisation. We have good relationships with their maritime and marine transport departments. And some of the areas where we look to improve global regulation about transportation, we're not always so far apart on trying to establish what we would describe as level playing fields.
Wealth has the ability to unite, because people can see value creation. It surpasses boundaries of geography, of nation states, of culture. But if we were to go there, there's the other side. It's almost like the yin and yang, the good Jedi versus the bad Sith, for example. Because of that same reason, then there's this dark side also moving. Subcontracting is not a bad thing if it's transparent. It's above the board. But too many times, the construction industry, even unions, has been said to be able to be swayed by powerful lobbies, by vested interests, by people who have resources. So at this year's World Economic Forum, I see less of a topic on corruption, but I believe from my side of the world, if not your side of the world, a lot of trickle-down impact of that value creation got hijacked away because of all this. And is this on the agenda with the union too, fighting for transparency?
I think, without question. I think it's impossible sometimes to relate global north issues with global south issues. If we're talking trying to take modern technology and maximise the usage of a container by mapping, digitally measuring, and making sure that it's not travelling empty back and forwards, burning up and adding emissions. You have to have a stable infrastructure. Yes. And a lot of our, we have, our regions we're discussing, as I say, the future of work. Our African unions say, hang on a minute, future of work, very interesting, but we're trying to sustain ourselves at a level to secure employment.
Yes.
Their biggest problem is precarious work and not enough investment in direct delivery. And we have a couple of projects with the World Bank, not always the best friend of the labour movement, where we're trying to work with them in Nairobi to bring a more systematic public transport system.
Yes.
So, for example, they operate a lot on buses in Nairobi.
Okay.
It's very competitive.
Yes.
It's owner-operator. People like to be
Undercut,
there. But we're saying, actually, health and safety risk, drug and alcohol, criminal aspects, you need a much more tighter regulation.
Yes.
And I think this is kind of that going back to the beginning of the conversation, the American ideological position that you subcontract on open markets. Yes, there's a space for that, for fair, transparent, clear competition. But at the same time, you need to people, and it doesn't matter whether you're a Malay or Malaysian or you're from the UK or North America, Russia, China, you need to have confidence that the legislative, the leaders are fair and transparent in how they build these economies. So for us, you know, the thing about the World Economic Forum is you get so many different points of view.
Correct.
And you have to pull all those strands together to work out, okay, well, what's our policy position on this? So ours is proper jobs. We want investment in emerging economies and the developing world, but we don't think you can do it in a no rules based environment. You have to be able to compete. The multinationals, the ones that we deal with that may pull us out of this kind of drive to the bottom, have to deliver the UN's sustainable goals, because those are the corporate responsibles.
Yes.
And people like you are part of that process to make them accountable. And I will say, for the labour movement, when a little bit controversial, some of the government politicians today are, the policy depth is really just to get a quick win with the electorate. And I think we make some mistakes when we don't collectively, well, not just all of us, the unions as well, if we just say what we think the audience wants to hear, because we have some massive challenges right now.
Bite the bullet, that's what I say.
We have to make decisions. You know, there's no shame in planning. There's no shame in good corporate governance, and there's no shame in naming and shaming if people aren't prepared to say where that enormous donation went to and what it was put used to. We can't really afford, when we've got to deal with climate, and we see future of work technology as part of some of the answers to climate.
Correct.
You can't invest and not be certain 100% of that investment's not reaching the problem. And that's our issue in a number of countries, continents. I won't, you know, and I don't think it's just a global south, global north issue. It's a reality that I agree with you in some cases. Decisions can be swayed, but I think media, the internet, technology, but it's not available for everyone. It should be to make us all accountable for the decisions.
I want to share with you my first experience a few years ago. I don't travel much outside of my country, but when I did travel for the first time to UK, and I'm like, because I take trains all the time, and how could the train system in the UK not be better than the ones in Singapore? And you know, Singapore started what, 65 when they went out of Malaysia and formed their own nation. And so on one hand, I realized union movement is crucial. It's a stakeholder of its own. But where the union is weaker, like in Singapore, even if it's existent at all, where the government is very strong, there's more efficiency of the transportation network and technology. So I'm very naive on these things, but if you can reconcile these two gaps, because Singapore gives credence to people who believe strong leadership, you know, lesser freedom. But when I look at what's happening in the UK, you have stronger unions. But is the whole infrastructure of rail, for example, better?
Okay, so gosh, lots of points there to tackle. I probably would say to you first off, and we have a long association with Singapore, there is a labour movement. And it's quite different to the Anglo-Saxon confrontational model. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't work, right? So like it's not unlikely to be quite as negative on Singapore because NTUC, we work closely with them.
Fair enough.
I think you have to, I'll come to British unions too, but I think you have to recognise strategic positioning, strategic thinking. There's a lot to be envied about how Singapore takes the best minds from their commercial world, somehow convinces them to join government, and then run government as a quasi-business, mapping out how to be fit for the future. So as a human being who travels the world, I see some benefits in that question. Then on the other hand, they're also pretty good with sharing although they recognise it's not too good to be all over everyone's regions doing it the Singaporean way, right?
Yeah.
So for me, Singapore is actually interesting about how it builds and prepares itself for the future, and I think their GD or their average salary is quite high, right? And quite high, not in Asia Pacific, but quite high on a global level. So, and constantly re-engaging and reinventing itself. On the other hand, you open up two things for me. One is the power of British unions and or the traditional British union model. But the first issue I want to talk about is public transport. And we're very strong advocates for public transport. And even the Singaporean model is actually quite good based on that. So when they've mapped, this is what we need to move the furthest people in our small country to the centre of town, the bus, the metro, MRT, all works in tandem and has a retail outlet and has a number of cost centres to offset the cost. The British system of rail is based on a Victorian model of building lines and actually hasn't had that level of government or even industry commitment over time. You're not going to be surprised that I think the Tory government's decision to sell up and franchise great big parts of it was a bad decision, because exactly what you see is what we've got. So the state owns the track, but doesn't make enough money to invest in the track and modernise the thinking. So you can go to different parts of Europe where the Belgians have central trains with big shopping centres on, and they're not anywhere near as run down as the UK model. And so like, I think my point, to be very clear, is you get what you pay for. If you don't invest in your infrastructure, you can't lead the world. And if you don't lead the world, then you're not an attractive place for business to come.
I don't usually talk about union issues because that's not my forte, but having done so a few times at the World Economic Forum, it always gives me the impression that no longer this is about, carrying placards and confronting the other side, but you need data. You need to map data. You need to see patterns in the whole millions of union members that you have around the world. And you even have to fight for a voice in how the future is being mapped out by powerful forces like governments and big corporations. I mean, I wouldn't go into a union even if you pay me just coming from that door. So before we leave this conversation, I just want to get your inside view of that, because I really, really think very heavy burdens on the shoulder of everyone leading unions around the world right now.
Yeah, well, you probably put it far more eloquently than I would, and I would probably agree, because the world is changing so fast. It's not the same to have it's not so easy to have all the answers to a changing world. But you have to remember what unions are built on. They're built on principles of solidarity, and that the collective is more powerful than the individual. Now, I believe those fundamental messages resonate all around the world. You just got to find a way to communicate that message. For us, making sure that women are more integrated into the employment and given equal opportunities to progress in society is a big stepping stone towards making sure that unions are relevant as we go forward. And if you look at the statistics when it comes to unemployed young people, and for our purpose we say anyone under 35 is young, there's less and less opportunities for them to get good quality jobs. Now, you don't need to be a genius to work out that continues to build unrest. And if you look at the other side of a smaller world and the internet and the brands and the big shopping malls, the haves and have-nots become more and more crudely exposed. Now, I still believe, and I'm proud to have the responsibility you identify, because I think we're one of the pillars of society. And we have to take our traditional strengths and our values. We have to continue to understand what is the big conversation, not be intimidated by it, and then engage with the decision makers. a big advocate of young people to be part of our organisation. Our organisations, we pass resolutions about how do we become more dynamic as an organisation, and that actually means we have to go work harder and build infrastructure. So, for example, part of our methodology is national coordinating committees.
Okay.
And in the last 6 months, I've been in India, I've been in the Philippines, and inside those governance bodies, we've changed constitutions to make sure young workers are part of that process. Women who we've been working for longer, 20 years plus. But it's absolutely critical that we re-educate also some of our leaders. We won't change the labour movement and or our position of using leverage and power unless we can convince young people, women and our existing membership that we will continue to be valued and that our principles are still as strong as ever and that we've got a voice that should be heard at the World Economic Forum, at regional governance, at national level.
Amen to that, and good luck. Yeah. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thanks to you for watching. This is a special Agenda AWANI right here at the World Economic Forum in Davos.